You'll always want more people. You won't have the right people, whatever it is, to running the pointiest end unit in the military apparatus or an Antarctic station. You'll always be short. So if you can flick the switch in your head, just understand, you go, it doesn't matter who I want. If I don't have them, lead the team I've got for the situation we face ahead of us.
Hello and welcome back, or welcome to The Messy Middle, a podcast designed for people tired of chasing external methods to resolve our internal messiness. I'm your host, Andrew Horsfield. The purpose of this podcast is to have conversations with leaders and experts in their field who share personal and practical strategies that you can implement to advance your career, company, and life. You can find out more or listen to previous episodes at andrewhorsfield.com/podcast. Leadership can be difficult at the best of times, but for David Knoff, this took on a whole new meaning when, as station leader at Davis Research Station in Antarctica, he was told due to the COVID pandemic that his ride home was being cancelled indefinitely. David and his team were stuck in one of the most isolated and challenging places on the planet. What was supposed to be a routine mission turned out to be one of David's most challenging leadership experiences. Lessons he's dissected and shared in his compelling book, 537 Days of Winter. In this conversation, we discuss navigating uncertainty, decision-making, how he balanced risk, safety, and the well-being of his team, strategies that David used to keep the team motivated, as well as the lessons he learned leading a team in such challenging circumstances. While many of us will never face Antarctic-level challenges, the lessons David provides in this conversation are practical, insightful, and worth applying in the everyday challenges we all face as leaders. It's time to listen to the compelling story and leadership lessons from David Knoff. David, welcome to The Messy Middle. It's awesome to have you on, and I've really been looking forward to having this conversation. Leading people is one thing, but leading them in isolated environments under extreme pressure is another thing altogether. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation and the lessons you've learned and the things that we'll extract from that experience. So welcome. It's awesome to have you on.
No worries. Thanks for having me on, Andrew, and good day to everyone listening around the world.
Before we progress too deeply into that experience and conversation, can you sort of walk us through as best you can, Davis Station? Where's it located? What's there? I know there's probably not a typical day that you experience, but what does that average day look like for someone who's spending time in that winter or summer expedition?
So Davis Station, located 3,000 odd kilometres away from Australia, about a 2-week voyage on a ship across the Southern Ocean, which is wild and woolly at the best of times. Located in an ice-free region called the Vestfold Hills, which is not too far from a place called the Amory Ice Shelf. So if you Google or look at any of those places, they'll come up and they'll give you a sense of the region. So most of the stations, and Davis is not unique in that regard, is set in an ice-free area. Antarctica is known for its ice, but actually the best place to build the stations is on the few ice-free areas. So it's located in a rocky outcrop, which is about a 400 square kilometre kind of diamond-shaped or triangular-shaped wedge of rock, which gives us the station operating area. And at the peak of summer, so you're talking January, where the snow's all melted, the ice isn't covering the rocks, it can actually look pretty barren and not. Antarctica is technically a desert, but it can have a strange mining camp vibe to it in the summertime versus in the wintertime when it's completely inundated by snow and you certainly don't see a lot of rock underneath. But an average Antarctic station at Davis is a really good example of a pretty much typical station, similar to Australia's station at Casey, which is our biggest one. And then we have a third continental station at Mawson, which is a little bit smaller and a little bit more heritage vibe to it. But it looks a lot like a very small country town or mining outpost or something, save for the main focus is scientific research. So yes, you'll have accommodation buildings with messing facilities, and you'll have a gym and a warehouse and power stations or power houses. You'll also have a whole heap of laboratories and different scientific instruments scattered around the station. So often you'd walk past something, and there used to be one area that looked a bit like a vineyard. And you go, oh yeah, just down by the vineyard. And you go, no, that's a cosmic scientific array thing that's looking up and counting ions in the ionosphere and can tell you the composition of meteorites and all sorts of stuff. You're like, oh yeah, looks like a vineyard though. And so you're constantly walking past these strange little contraptions that are all scattered around, and most of them will have ropes on them and a project code of if something happens, that's the project code. And you I go back to the office, and that can be almost one of the typical daily things that would happen as a station leader is you've got your routine, you'd run your morning meeting or you know, your daily operations meeting in the summertime to launch the helicopters and make sure everyone knows what they're doing. And then you'll go around and spot fires or things will come up, such as you might get a phone call or an email from an institution back in Australia. It could be up at University of Queensland or whoever's got that remote instrument to just send through to us to say, hey, by the way, we've lost data from X installation. Can you have a look? And you'd go out and have a look and go, yep, cool. There's been a snow or rock or ice or something has fallen on it, or your solar panels are covered in ice, so you've lost power. We'll fix that up and get it going again. And that could be there's sort of the typical days, but the best rock star days, you're flying around in helicopters over glaciers to remote locations. I was lucky enough to go and visit the Indians and Chinese and Russian stations. They're about 100 kilometres away from Davis, and that's great when part of your job is to engage and work with the other national programs to deconflict and share scientific information. So they're some of the best days of my life, I reckon.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, you'll have days where the weather's just, you've got howling winds of over 100 kilometres an hour, which is almost cyclonic at times. Temperatures in the summertime, it won't get much colder than -10 or -15, but in the wintertime, you're talking -30 to -40 on the worst days. So you are just cabin bound and pitch dark in the wintertime, where you can have days almost into weeks where you really just won't be getting outside for anything other than absolutely essential movement between the buildings and for any real critical science or repairs that have to be done.
Thank you. It's such a really wonderful scene. Talk to me about your leadership philosophy. Knowing that you've been appointed station leader, what did you have as that you went down with, and how did that philosophy evolve as you went through your time at Davis?
Yeah, I think one of my core philosophies about being a leader, and certainly in a situation like that, is really at the end of the day, be a really good team member first. So right from the start and all the way through that particular trip and the other ones I've done, having a really keen interest in what everyone is doing, what the different scientific teams are doing, what the different trades teams are doing, trying to understand what their daily life and job or their perspective on the whole thing is, and then hooking in and being involved in it. And that goes from the work side of things to a lot of the social side of things as well. So right from the start, and again, like I said, before we even left, you're setting that up before you depart, that you want to be involved in all of the social aspects of station, from being involved in the band and the musical events to some of we ran a homebrew set up down there. So you're involved in that. You're involved in the DIY cooking skills and different aspects from that help make the community a team. And that's a really important thing to remember, that yes, you're appointed as the station leader or a team leader in any circumstance, but you're a team member first. And it helps a lot when people can look at their leader and go like, oh, well, they're involved in everything. They don't sort of go, oh no, I don't want to be vulnerable, or I don't want to be seen to be involved in fun or anything. You're like, no, be a good team member first. You got to walk a fine line between you don't want to be the clown of the whole operation, but you want to be seen to be involved in it. And that was something that keeps your own mental health healthy as well, in terms of you go, well, I've got some outlets. I like being involved in music and other aspects. You can do that. You don't have to hold back and think, oh, that's not for me to be involved in. Yeah.
And I think people who are part of the team just value a leader who can hold that leadership space well, but also be a follower when needed to be. So handing over the reins or responsibility to someone else, or appropriate decisions given to someone else, it allows that team to bond really quickly. Is that your experience down there?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the best opportunities I've had down in Antarctica have come from willingly stepping back. So certainly my early expeditions, when I didn't have a lot of field experience, I would be in a situation where we go, hey, we've got to get a team to go out to this field location, might be either hundreds of kilometres away if we're taking the helicopters, or 10, 20 kilometres away if we're taking quad bikes or tracked vehicles or something out across the sea ice. And I didn't have the experience to lead those minor trips. And so I'd happily be able to sit back and go, all right, well, say, Andrew, you're far more experienced at this than I am. Off we go. What do you need from me? I'll come along and often a lot of the little Antarctic trips, the sub trips you'll do for these field trips, they'll just need labourers we've got to go and retrieve this instrument, or we've got to go and do some basic maintenance at this remote refuge or hut or cache or something. We've got a lot of survival caches and huts that we kind of dotted around the station operating area. So if you ever got into trouble, you're never too far from safety. But that requires that we've got to go out every now and then and swap over the medical kits, swap out gas bottles and basically do some basic maintenance on them. And those trips, pretty much anyone can do it. Those trips, though, they're challenging, but they're also quite fun. And for me, they were opportunities to not be in charge. Now, you're still the boss, and people never quite forget that. But it's an opportunity to sit back and go, all right, what do you need from me? I'll cook dinner, or I'll start prepping other stuff, or, yep, you need me to lug a gas bottle up a hill. Let's go.
Yeah. And one of the things I really loved in your book, 537 Days of Winter, one of the things I love that you spoke about was lead the team you have, not the team you want. I thought that was a really nice philosophy that you took. Can you tell us a bit about that and what that means for you?
Yeah, that's come about over a few years, and it speaks to a couple of elements. And one is that you'll always find a situation, and you would have, any of your listeners and anyone that's ever been part of a team would know this, that it can be really easy when something's not going wrong, or you're failing, or you lost a grand final, or you failed in a business endeavor, or something's gone wrong. You just quickly go, oh, if only we'd had that extra person, or if only we had more whatever. You'll never have all of that. You'll always be carrying vacancy. And what I talk about in the book is that due to the impacts of COVID, we were actually 2 people short on what we're supposed to. One of them was our coordinating scientist for the winter, and the other one was a specific plumber to help with the task that ended up and kicked a can down the road that hurt us a bit later. And it was this fact of, even in a situation where you've got a nationally funded Antarctic program with all this recruiting and all these things, COVID got in the way of us having our full complement of staff. And it happens all the time in different scenarios where, for whatever reason, you're 1 or 2 or however many people short of what you want. And you have to just get past that and go, well, lead the team you've got, not the team you want. You're going to want the extra people, or the extra help, or the slightly more experienced person here, or the slightly more enthusiastic person there, or the slightly better attitude on that particular subgroup, or whatever it is. You'll never get it, and you'll never get a perfect team. And that came out of, I've worked with some pretty pointy end groups in my time, from military special forces units and other things. And there's always a dickhead. Sorry if I'm swearing on your point. There's always an idiot, or you're always short staffed. There's always a problem. And that I found it remarkable to be in these really kind of, revered groups and teams that you go, nah, it's a common problem, from manning a volunteer barbecue at a soccer club on a weekend that you'll always want more people, you won't have the right, but whatever it is, to running the pointiest end unit in the military apparatus or an Antarctic station, you'll always be short. So if you can flick the switch in your head to just understand, it doesn't matter who I want. If I don't have them, lead the team I've got for the situation we face ahead of us.
And how do you do that? Because I think that's quite a unique skill in leaders, because I think the default, as you've explained, is a lot of people would go to the what we don't have rather than what do we have and how do we make the most of what we have. Is there a way that you've developed that, or a technique you use that you could share at all?
Really, the more you can know your team in terms of their skill sets and backgrounds, the better. And that goes beyond their resumes. Now, you'll get into some corners where it doesn't matter if someone doesn't have a 50-ton crane ticket. It doesn't matter how much they want one or whatever. They're not going to get it. So you'll have a few barriers where it doesn't matter. But there's so many other aspects of understanding members of your team, or their background, or their motivation, or their journey, where you can go, well, we don't have someone who can do X particular skill, but we've got members of the team who are interested in developing that skill, and that might be enough, and we can encourage that and go from there. And you can understand. So there's these little things, and that's one of the greatest things, and it actually speaks to the history of a lot of Antarctic expeditions back to the heroic age, 100 odd years ago. They would always use members of the team to run seminars and lectures on different topics and different things when they were stuck inside during blizzards or at the worst of times, because you've only got who you've got. And for us, that meant having to use that group to create the fun and grow and kind of nurture those skills. And it's an interesting, I work as a professional speaker, so I'm always a big fan of when organisations are happy to get an external speaker in to come and tell a great Antarctic story. But often there's other groups. So if a group say, oh, we'd really love to get you along, but we can't get the date to work, or there's issues of, oh, we don't have the budget to do that, or like we can't do this, and head office don't want to get an external speaker, and you go, that's absolutely fine. Look at your team. Find someone inside your own team that's got the skills and experience and a great story to tell, because everyone does, and giving people that opportunity and an environment where they can, grow into those different roles can really, really help. And it can do a lot for you, in the Australian context or the kind of real world, normal world context, a lot for retention and staff satisfaction as well, team satisfaction.
Well, let's get to the crux of the book and probably some of the depth of this conversation. But right near the end of your tour of duty, if you like, or your expedition, you received the news due to COVID, because it was around that 2019 period that you sort of were leading the expedition at Davis Station. You hear that your time is going to be extended. You can't go out as per the normal schedule and plan. So can you talk us through initially you receiving that message, processing that, sharing that with the team, just and how that was received by the team down there?
Yeah, no, I remember that. I remember that moment well. So 23rd of June 2020 was when we were officially told we're staying longer. So at this point, we've been away for nearly 2/3 of our original intended expedition. We'd left Australia in October 2019 before the pandemic broke out or anything. At this point, there's 24 of us on the station, absolute middle of winter, pitch dark outside, minus 30 degrees, and not a lot to do, pretty low tempo, and really a time where you're trying to find hope and looking towards the end of the journey. And for us, from that point, 23rd of June to our expected return date, which was, November, we're looking at 3 or 4 months. You're kind of like, all right, or 3 or 4 months until at least the process of going home began, in terms of flights and ships start coming back to Antarctica to start that summer, and our return is involved in all of that. So you've got that hope and that sequence of events that's going to happen in the weeks and months ahead as we start gearing up for that summer and the handover and our return back to Australia. And that's our horizon, and that's our road forward at that point. And yet, 23rd of June 2020, I went into to my office that day, did a video call with the operations manager back in Australia, who just said, hey, look, due to a variety of reasons, one being the new icebreaker that was supposed to bring us home, which was being constructed over in Europe, the construction had been shut down because of COVID. So that was off the table. It wasn't going to be ready in time to get us, let alone even the year after. So our joyous journey home on the maiden voyage of a new icebreaker, that was off the table. The old icebreaker had been decommissioned and was unavailable to return to polar waters for a whole range of quite technical reasons and safety reasons, that it just wasn't suitable. So there was no Australian flagged icebreaker that could come and get us. We couldn't use any other national programs because of COVID. There was a really limited cooperation between the national programs, but ordinarily we could have used Japanese, Chinese, American vessels. We've shared them in the past in a variety of ways. That was all off the table because of COVID. And then the third level of redundancy we have is the aviation access to the continent, which we can run and have been able to run for about 20 years now. But that was unavailable to get to Davis Station because the smaller aircraft we used to ferry between the stations were all in the Northern Hemisphere and kind of locked up there because of COVID. So you had this situation of a program and an operational model with triple redundancy that now had zero options of, well, the safest thing for us is to leave you all there into 2021, and we'll try and work out a shipping option or some sort of option to get you out and let you know. So at this point, not only did they tell us, hey, you're not going home as planned, but we can't actually tell you when you'll go home. We can give you a pretty good guarantee we will work something out, and we had faith in that, but you're looking for a lock solid, hey, you're extended, or this is the new plan. And when I was told it, and when we were told, there was no firm plan of, hey, this is how we're going to get you home, and this is, when. But also for us, the craziest part of it was, if you cast your mind back to mid 2020, we didn't know what home was going to look like. And that level, that anxiety was starting to creep in. We had a team of 24, 3 women, 21 men from all across Australia and New Zealand, and all sorts of backgrounds and age groups and everything as well. Youngest 27, oldest in their 50s, variations thereof of kids and all sorts of different things. People's minds were really starting to wonder and wander around what the hell's home even look like now, and what's home going to look like by the time we get back there. So I got that news first. And for most of us in the group, the writing had been on the walls, with certainly the icebreaker not being ready on time. There was even doubts about that when we were leaving. We're like, oh yeah, good luck with a $500 million ship being ready on time. So that was already doubtful, but certainly we never expected that, hang on a minute, there'll be no way to get us home as planned.
It's also the complexity for you around that there's not a solution. So often there's this issue has happened, but here's the contingencies we're trying to work through. But essentially you're stuck there. So that's, just in case listeners haven't picked that up, that's a really difficult position for you to be in as a leader delivering a message with no real answers or way to say, well, this is what we're working on, I'll come back to you with.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that then became part of it. Now, there's a few other elements that we knew the station, they oversupply the stations for these sorts of contingencies. Now, we never really had to pull that handle in the modern age to this extent to say, oh, BTW, you're all staying another 6 months and potentially another year. We had enough food to deal with that, and we had enough fuel if we'd gone into fuel saving mode and rationing and some other wins. You go, well, hang on a minute, we've got hundreds of barrels of aviation fuel for an aviation program that's now not going to happen that summer, and the generators can run on a mix of some of those. So you start to go like, oh, yeah, okay, we're stuck, but we've got contingency and reserves to manage some of these issues. Now, they're going to kick some issues down the road if you start running the wrong fuels or suboptimal fuel mixtures and other stuff. Like you start killing generators that should last 30 years, they're going to start lasting 2. But that became then the hardest part of it. We didn't have a plan. And one of the mantras became, like, this might not be our fault, but it's our problem. And as a group, so I went and spoke to my deputy station leader, who she was just the absolute backbone of the whole operation. And she'd done a lot more time in Antarctica than anyone else in the team, and it was the best decision I ever made was picking her as the deputy going into it. And she was the wintering chef for us as well. Went and spoke to her, and she was already in her brain calculating how to ration all the food and managing some of the human aspects of that. And she was just an absolute superstar. So I went and spoke to her, and then I went and put a notice on the board that said, yep, station meeting it just after dinner, and got everyone together. Yeah, and then there was no point in rushing it, of like kind of cancelling work and bringing everyone in when everyone kind of knew what was coming anyway. So got everyone together that night and ripped the Band-Aid off and confirmed the news that had rumoured out throughout the day anyway. And that was the moment then you go, okay, we could sit here and complain about it or whatever, and there's a natural amount of that happened anyway, but you're also trying to refocus it and recalibrate everyone to now take ownership of the problem and say, okay, this is what's happened. It's not our fault, but it's going to be our problem. We need to reset our tempo. So we were planning on being here for another couple of months. It's going to be another, at that point, 8 or 9 or whatever months it was from there. And these dates were all pretty variable. So mentally you're like, okay, it was a few months now. It's a while, and it might be another winter. How do we change our tempo? How do we change our focus? How do we change our structures and everything, our routines, to now be sustainable for a longer period? And it'd be the same as if you're, the maths of it is like if you're running a marathon and you go, okay, I've got to run 5-minute 30 Ks and that's my pace, and I know that I can run for 3.5 hours at that pace and achieve, my marathon time that I want to get. But you get to 30 Ks and you go, I'm going well, I'm feeling good, my Achilles is still okay, or whatever injury you're carrying at your 30 K mark. And someone goes, oh, well, you make a wrong turn or whatever it is. And they go, oh, by the way, mate, you're now at the 60 K ultra marathon course. And you're like, huh? And you start to go, hang on a minute, I can't do 5-minute 30s that long. I've got to now do the maths and work out how to change. So we sort of went through that process, and that process, there was some phases to that of, we had an initial meeting straight away and then gave it a week to permeate. And then we had another station meeting that a week later. That's when it got pretty heated, and there was some interesting feedback there. And it was a great moment, or not great moment, it was certainly a very tough moment for everyone. But I started getting some sort of rounds in my direction from members of the team. And one of them even pulled himself up as he was sort of yelling at me. And it was really encouraging to see. He's like, Dave, I'm not yelling at you. This is so far beyond what any of us expected. And it's far beyond your own control. What the hell are they doing back there to actually come up with a plan? And how has that been communicated? Where's the sorry? And we're like, where is the sorry? Because up until that point, it had just been quite clinical and operational. So we then, and this is a great moment of just when the best laid plans actually make it worse. So we're going, where is the sorry? So called the operations manager up, and I knew they'd been busy just trying to come up with the freaking plan, and they had to manage all this, and they got other stations to manage. So they had a lot else on their plate. But we've gone, okay, well, let's organise the sorry. So we go, okay, we'll set up a video call in the cinema/conference room thing, and do a video call with the ops manager and the director of the Antarctic program, and they can explain it all and apologise and take some of the heat off me as the messenger and be great. So we get in the cinema that day later or whatever it is and set it up. But in true Antarctic style and true of the time, the freaking internet let us down. And so what was supposed to be a moment for the team to vent frustrations and get answers to questions and all this sort of stuff ends up frustrating everyone even more. It became this moment where we're sitting there going, this is actually making it worse, or it's raising the stress level of the group.
Yeah.
But in some ways, it sort of helped. It got it out there, like, okay, this is bigger than us. It's bigger than that, and gave us a chance, and then all laugh at the ridiculousness of it. And it probably reminded us how far away we are as well. And it probably didn't really hit home for everyone until we hit the 12-month anniversary of being away, and that's when, as you've read in the book, things started to really start falling off the rails on a daily basis in a whole range of unexpected ways.
You may be going to allude to that in terms of how it fell off the rails, but what did you notice about those who coped versus those who struggled? Were there mindsets or characteristics that you noticed in people that had resilience and adaptability and coping skills that others didn't?
Yeah, it was fairly hard to predict how people are going to react to that news. And the big part of that is you're unsighted on their personal life. Beyond what they've told you or beyond what you know from the conversation at the dinner table and everything, you're unsighted on how their other part of their life is going to handle that. And that was probably the bigger factor in who handled it well and who didn't, because everyone's gone through a selection process, everyone's demonstrated resilience and come from experience and background. So it's a community that are going to handle that news in their stride anyway, because they were selected to be able to do that. So more or less everyone goes, okay, cool, that's the problem. But what happened then as it went through the next few months was most of the group and as a collective, everyone did find their own ways to deal with it, or found the balance of the right amount of anger and the right amount of frustration versus the right amount of being a true Antarctic expedition and going, well, that's what we're here to do, and we'll do it till we go home. And that was really great to see from everyone. But those that didn't go well, and then there's what, which is characterized by one particular character in the book based on a couple of real incidents. And that was when at that 12-month anniversary point when we were refilling the station's water supply, which we'd supposed to have had an expert plumber who knew all that equipment and knew how to do that process really well. He hadn't been able to get to us because of COVID, so we were leading the blind a little bit on this. The plumbers we had did a great job of understanding all the instructions and that, but as everyone knows, experience doesn't account, lack of experience won't account for great instructions and stuff. So we're in this process of refilling the water supply, and at one point, one member of the team just lost it, and he then just sort of went off the rails and spectacularly decided that he quit. He just walked up to me and said, I want to do this. I wanted to go home. This is BS. Stuff you, stuff the government, stuff this whole thing. Oh, I quit. I don't want to work anymore. And you go, this is, October 2020, we've still got months to go. And he's going like, what the hell, mate? Like, you can't quit. And he's like, no, well, I did. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go home. And you go, what a ridiculous scenario to be in. And it really boiled my blood. And I talk about this pretty openly. That was the one time where I felt like I did just crack. And I'm like, I don't know what to do here. This is just ridiculous. And had to then take a few steps back to calm my own thoughts down and then go, okay, let's now separate my personal thoughts on this situation to the fact that I've now got one member of the team that has decided he doesn't want to be part of the team, or has said as much. What does that mean, and what do I do, and what do we as a collective do to get this guy back in the team and prevent others now going like, oh, I'm going to join him on his journey to not work anymore. And it then led it was about a week of working through that problem with the individual, with the team around it, with the team back in Hobart and others, to find some common ground and renegotiate a few things around his work balance and his reporting streams in the community. And then at the same time, rewarding and working with the group of people that hadn't quit, who had rolled with all of his frustrations and challenges were legitimate, of like, yeah, this is ridiculous. And maybe we hadn't all realized it at the time, and we'd just gone, okay, well, we're staying, great. But he had, had quite a natural response in some regards to be like, this is crazy. You can't do this. Well, I don't want to do that. You didn't give me a choice. And so there was this whole range of emotions going through my own head and everyone else's as we worked through that particular problem. And thankfully, a week later, we got him back to work and changed his roles, changed his reporting streams a little bit, and managed to find a few other changes into the community that helped give everyone more freedom and more control over their own work-life balance, which had been there, but maybe we'd forgotten and needed reminding on some aspects. So that was probably a point where as a leader, I realized that, and kind of gave up on the hope of, leading the whole thing perfectly to the end. Of you kind of, as a leader, it's a tough one that in those situations you do have to get comfortable with being unpopular at times. And that was a moment where I'm like, all right, if I can just get him back to work and keep the team as a unit, don't all have to be friends, and just sort of have to let that go a bit and go, all right, this is getting pretty ugly, but I got to get them back together as a group and find a way to just get this to the end so we all go home safely, and I'll take that. And that was a hard one to grapple with, and it's still to this day a kind of hard moment to look back on and go, oh, if only this, if only that, like how did it come to that? And there's a lot of lead up to that. He didn't just it wasn't just completely out of the blue. There'd been a number of incidents and issues along the way that led to it, and we tried to correct it before it happened, and it still kind of happened. But maybe it's one of those moments you go, maybe it had to happen, that sometimes you just need to let it all out and then move forward. And that's another good lesson on the mental health curve that we all learn as a team down there around. You'll get to a point, and certainly we were pushed to the limits of sort of mental endurance with it all, of you might have a strategy and you might have days where you can demonstrate the utmost of resilience and you can deal with anything. It is then perfectly human that 10 minutes later you just lose it, or you can't even, and you've got nothing to grasp to, and you've got no direction. And then 10 minutes later, you're back on track. And that is something that is perfectly human and natural, and not something to beat yourself up about. And we all had those moments along the way. And certainly in that third quarter of the whole trip was when everyone had a moment or a day or a week where they were just at rock bottom, and we were so far away from getting home and getting out of the problem that it was just hard to swim to it.
Yeah, and I mean, managing team dynamics and personalities in the best of times is difficult, let alone when you're isolated and dealing with the news that you're explaining. And as a consequence, not just of the news, but then the work that still has to continue to run the station and participate and contribute, as you mentioned. I mean, outside of that one specific example, were there things that you learned about doing that in an isolated environment that you lean on now as a leader, about managing those team dynamics and different personalities that you haven't necessarily covered off yet?
Yeah, I think the subsequent trips I've done, so since that particular trip, I've been back a number of times in different roles as a field and voyage leader. And I've certainly felt less less inclined to try and fix everything straight away. I'd always been very proactive of like, oh wow, there's a problem. I'm going to try and get in there and fix it and try and point it in the right direction. I'd almost now allow the groups to be a group and let it find its own way. And if something's gone wrong or someone's had a blowout or there's been an issue, to rather than see that as a, oh my God, it's failed or it's a disaster, to just go, that's just part of the journey. That's going to happen. You're going to have a day. And I had a good one this recent trip. So I was out in the middle of nowhere, 400 kilometres away from the main station, running a field camp of 42 people, researching a glacier, the Denman Glacier. We're doing a whole lot of work out there for a few months. And I had an incident where myself and one member of the team, we just had a disagreement over something, and it was petty, absolutely petty stuff I think it was around like restocking the honey or something so minute. And I got frustrated by that. I'm like, oh, if you look in the freaking pantry storage, there's more. Like, so don't complain about a problem. Go and look for the solution rather than complain. So something along those lines, and just like so, and they'd have the similar frustration with me. But it was just this case of it. Then just like went, all right, find them, give it a little bit of time. Then later that morning, went and found them and just said, and we both just laughed straight away. And it was this great release of like, oh my God, I can't believe we both just had this stupid disagreement over nothing. And it had both gotten to us. And you're looking at that point where we're months into this field trip. You're sleeping in a tent in minus 15 degrees. So you're never getting a good night's sleep. And you're coming into breakfast and someone's there complaining about the bloody. And the honey, it's hilarious as well. Honey in a minus 15 degree Antarctic tent is like concrete. So it can be frustrating as well, and really good for your grip strength while you're trying to get that stuff out of a squeeze bottle. But so you have these funny moments. And I probably, to answer your question then, in the subsequent trips and since then, been really comfortable with, you're going to have those moments. It's how you then deal with them, the moments afterwards to get it back on track becomes really important. Don't let it fester and try and reset it.
Yeah, love that. And of course, there's managing the team, but as a station leader, so you're obviously doing that and having a lot of energy outputted to managing the dynamics of the team, personalities, the issues, which were almost a daily occurrence in the book of something coming up that you had to throw yourself into. But there's also managing yourself and your own, mental fitness and being able to have, the load to carry all of those issues and work through them. Can you share about how you did that and maybe any advice for people who might be listening who don't have a level of that resilience or are not feeling that right now?
Yeah, I love this question. So how do you manage yourself when you're putting all your energy and effort into managing a team or a situation? How do you take time for yourself, which you tell a lot of leaders that, and it's laughable. Oh, I love laughing at that. Like, just remember to make some time for yourself. Like, I don't have any bloody time or anything. So that's perfectly natural again as well. But when you do need someone to talk to or you need a plan, I found the only solace I found and the only people I really wanted to talk to that actually helped were people who'd either been in my shoes or were in my shoes somewhere else. So the other Antarctic station leaders, who on the other end of a phone or a WhatsApp group or email chain I could communicate with, and then retired and former station leaders who would be back in Australia, and I could find moments. And that happened when the bloke quit. It was going back through the logs of different years and finding these scenarios when that had actually happened multiple times before. And right back to Shackleton 100 years ago, he'd had an incident like this. So reading about times when something had happened and that other people had gotten through it, and then either reaching out, Shackleton obviously long gone, couldn't speak to him, but could speak to others that had members of their team quit in the middle of an Antarctic expedition for whatever reason. And speaking to them, they're like, oh, don't worry about it, mate. Like it happens. You'll find some common ground, reset the relationship, have a chat over a cup of tea or a beer or whatever it is when it's suitable, have a laugh with him, and just the two of you will find some common ground and you'll get back to work. And I'm like, really? They're like, yeah, it happens. You'll be fine. And you kind of go, no, there's no way out of this. I'm in a dark place in a hole. It's irrecoverable. They're like, whatever. That's what I thought too. And having that is just amazing that you're never the first person to have a particular problem, and find someone that's dealt with and made it out the other side is so important. And they'll relate to you, you can relate to them. And but being open about your problems helps with that in the first place. So that was where I found the most solace, and found that got me through, and something I recommend to anyone else going down there in the leadership roles. And so the case in point, I got a call from a station leader not that long ago with a small, fairly routine sort of problem of a disagreement or a misinterpretation of what they were trying to do. And he's like, oh, hey, from what I can see in the station log, you had a similar issue. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And talked him through what we did and how we resolved it. And maybe that's the way they did, or maybe they didn't. So those are the best things to do for anyone out there. Find someone who's been in your position or is currently, and speak to them.
We learn in your book that Antarctica can be an inherently dangerous place, and there was a number of times with situations where you've got to balance, risk and embrace risk and be comfortable with it, but also make decisions based on, risk, health of the team, outcome you're trying to achieve. Can you share, your thought process in managing all of those things and making a decision that ultimately you say, right, that's the course of action that we're taking?
Yeah, it's a tricky one down there, because there's some inherent risks that are uniquely Antarctican. Like if you step outside in the wrong gear and equipment and trip over and break your ankle or knock your head or something, you can, you'll get hypothermia and you can freeze to death in minutes in some conditions. So there's some ridiculous risks around crevassing and icebergs and these other aspects of it. But funnily enough, there's a lot of controls in place to manage that in terms of the training and the experience and the procedures around some of those bigger risks. Where it can get tricky is when you're on the margins, or you'll have a really tricky decision between, we've got to achieve this. You'll have probably a scientist or a team leader in your office, or if it's not an office, it's a tent, or it's outside in howling winds, and you've got some difficult conditions to deal with. And case in point was there was a situation that developed this recent summer where I had two different field teams out at one particular time, where the forecast had been that the weather was marginal and it might or might not get to a point where we can't come and get you with helicopters. And got in touch with, so by the time we got in touch with the teams and the weather changed and I've rounded up the pilots and got an update from the forecasters and everyone, we're now in a situation where the helicopters were grounded. So all we could do was get in touch with those two different field parties and say, look, we can't come and get you, or we don't think we're going to come and be able to get you in the next hours into the night. And it's 24 hours of daylight in the summertime anyway, so we could have kind of got them anytime. But essentially, well, like you're stuck. And there was two different responses. And one group, and now this is again comes from the thing, you go, oh my God, you're going to abandon them in Antarctica. Yeah, but no one ever goes out the front door without enough food and equipment that they can get stuck. So straight away, they knew that they had refuges they could get to with a basic campsite they could set up. And we trained for this exact scenario right before we left and throughout the season, keeping people aware of it. So get in touch with this, and the answer from one particular group, they were like, you know what, that's fine. Don't even worry about trying. We've got a tent, we've got a stove, we've got food, we've got water, we've got sleeping bags, we've got everything we need. We're just going to set up the camp before the wind gets too bad and just come and get us tomorrow or whatever. And this team of three crammed into one tent for the night and had this great little adventure of, they got stuck in a tent for the night. The other group were slightly different. They were like, look, we're a few Ks away from our cache, which was very doable. They're like, look, we can hike there and everything, but that cache didn't quite have as much stuff, and they would just. And I'm like, look, that's great, but you've helped with that decision of now we're not looking to send helicopters in two directions to try and pick up two parties. One party are happy, the other party we just said, look, start making your way towards your emergency cache, and we'll. If we have an opportunity, we may not even try and get in touch with you, or we'll try and get in touch with you, but we'll launch a helicopter along a set path that would be able to visually identify you, and then it'll land at the nearest spot. And if you see a helicopter, move. And finally, a window opened up, and we're able to send a helicopter out, pick up those two, and bring them back, and they were back safe for the night. And that was one of those moments where you're managing the risk, but you've managed the risks before they've happened. that you've trained everyone to understand the realities of what can happen out there, what to do when something goes wrong, so that it's predictable and safe, even in the extreme. And those are the moments where you can sit back and go, it's not about managing the risks when they pop up. You've got to try and manage risks before they happen, so that everyone's prepared for it and understands. I know what they're thinking and what they're going to do, and they know how I'm thinking, and the process is going to occur back where we are, which is, the best advice I can give to people around that is, if you're trying to manage risks when they happen, you're probably not going to make a great assessment. But if you can try and foresee anything and everything before it happens and plan for it, all you're doing is going to the shelf of options when something goes wrong.
Do the lessons that you learned in Antarctica translate to more conventional environments from your experience? And are there any leadership habits that you've picked up from that experience that you still use in your just day-to-day, everyday life?
Yeah, they absolutely translate. And this is one of the things I'm toying with my next project, of how to take the way I look at risk and planning, which is based on the military process, or the military appreciation process. And it's which is a good fundamental way of stepping through, like, what are the conditions, so the environmental conditions we've got, what are the enemy trying to do, or what are the objectives out there, what are our capabilities, what do we want to do, what are we actually trying to target, what are three basic options, and wargaming that, and then coming up with an agreed solution at the end, and then issuing a set of orders from that. So that's the sort of main process that I use, but that works for anything. And the crux of it is that if you go, oh, this is a complex scenario, I need to use the formal process, you won't be that efficient at it. And one of the things that I think sets military leaders aside from their civilian counterparts, and that there are great civilian examples of this training, but what the military academies around the world will do really well is they'll take a really lengthy and complex formal planning process and just keep repeating it and making you run even the simplest scenarios. They'll say, you've got to do a full process. And you go, but it's so obvious that we're just going to attack. Yeah, we're going to throw smoke, put a machine gun over there and just charge up the hill. That's the solution. They're like, no, run a full process, come up with three options. And because you've trained your brain to do that for even the simplest of problems, every time something comes up in the rest of your life, your brain goes, right, what are the conditions? What are my options? 1, 2, 3, option is 2.5, let's go. And you see military leaders. So that's the thing, that the more you can train your brain to process any challenge or any problem the same way, be it simple or complex, you will do a better job of it later. And one of the things they joke about is that you can use that process to plan a wedding. You're taking this process that's designed of how do you invade Normandy, but also how do you run a wedding, and you step through every possible thing and account for every scenario, so that when something happens of, bride's late, weather's terrible, band are useless, uncles are drunk, whatever, your plan has accounted for it, and it goes from there.
Tell me about how your perspective on leadership shifted, if anything, after this experience. So can you share some of the lessons that you took away from those 537 days in the isolated part of the world?
Well, I think the main one is the point you brought up earlier of lead the team you've got and the situation you face. And that was the main one for me afterwards, to then quite, like I'd said earlier, to not take everything as seriously and try and find immediate solutions, or die in a ditch that, I haven't been able to solve this problem straight away. That is part of the journey, that the chaos and the uncertainty and the anxiety of being in a leadership position is being in a leadership position. Like, that's what it's all about. You won't need to lead on the good days. Anyone can captain a ship in calm seas. And you see this with great ships captains or anything. If the ship's sailing in calm seas on a blue sky day, the captain will be walking around down in the engine room, having a cup of tea, talking to the crew, looking at different things, or relaxing. It's perfectly natural to go, calm seas, blue skies, where's the captain? Having a nap. Nothing wrong with that, because that's where the captain can be on a calm day. It's the moments that are when they require leadership, that's when you've got to step in and step up to the plate. And that's something I've probably become more comfortable with since that particular year, and in subsequent trips and advice to other leaders of, you can be very guilty of over leading, certainly in your early years, and even when you're in newer environments, or you've just been appointed as a CEO and you've got to come in and you go, all right, I've got to put my stamp on everything. I want to change this, I want to do that. And you go, and everyone's seen this 1,000 times. Yeah, actually, can we let it run? Let it run how it's been going. It's clearly, you sacked the last CEO for whatever reason. So there's clearly something we've got to change, but let's just run it, or run 90% of it in this particular way. We're going to do a process at the end of that and review how we're going to change it, not just come in with a bunch of preconceived ideas about how it's all going to change. And you see that in various forms. So that's something that I've learned from those scenarios, is when you can let it run how it's been going, use your own eyes, take a bit of time, rather than try and over-lead too early, and don't lead when it's not necessary, to be able to sit back. Or if there's an opportunity for the leader to just be a good team member, do it. Do that. Be a good team member first, and then pick the moments that really need leadership. And you'll find naturally when that moment comes, everyone will start looking at you and you go, okay, now this is my idea, and this is the way we're going to get out of this. And rather than forcing yourself into the situation.
Yeah, good one. A great piece of advice for any parent or coach or leader out there. Before we wrap up, David, where can people go to contact you, buy the book, find out a little bit more about your compelling story and what you're doing now? Yeah,
I mean, the book should be available in most all good and bad bookstores across Australia and New Zealand, and also on Audible and ebook. So 537 Days of Winter, just chuck that in. For information about, I do public speaking and leadership and mentoring and training and stuff as well. So if you're interested in having me along to your school or company or organisation, just head to my website, www.davidknoff.com, and you can get in touch with me there and shoot me an email, and we'll work something out. And happy to come along and chat to you and your team and go from there. So thanks for having me on.
No worries. Thank you so much. It's it's a compelling story, but the insights you extract from it, and I think the tips that you've provided and from your own experience for listeners has been outstanding. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for the service to your country and spending an extended period of time in one of our stations.
No, thanks for that, and yeah, good luck to everyone out there.
Two quick things before we wrap up. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to access the full list of show notes or explore some other episodes, simply visit andrewhorsfield.com. And please consider forwarding this episode to someone that you think would benefit. It will not only be appreciated by the person you choose, but help spread the word and amplify the impact I'm trying to make for the podcast. Thanks for listening.